You knew this, Randy?
We are live. We are live.
Guys, been here for years.
We are live. I know it's Friday, but we need to.
Aren't you on, joint oversight? Yeah.
Okay.
Aren't you on?
The far end of the table is not settled. All right. We're good. We're all in our places. We some shiny faces. It is Friday. And I'm going to try and get you out of here at a good hour. We're going to start today. We've been over several things. We have spent at least one afternoon going over Act 73 and what was in it and what's happened. We have been over the financial sections of that now with Pledge Council and our Joint Fiscal Office. And today we're going to hear from the Agency of Education. And we still need to come up with a foundation formula. But under Act 73, all of that is contingent on the formation of new districts. And I am looking, I've got the bill, and the administration has said this is save the money that will allow us to go do the foundation formula. I've got a task force that was assigned to look at this issue in detail, and they are saying this just doing visit larger districts will not save enough money. So I'm hoping this committee can start to get some hard numbers, because we are a numbers committee, to work on. So we could make some determinations based on the facts as to what the next step might be or need to be. I know we are now a year later than we were when this bill was passed. So the timelines, which were very tight to start with, are going to need adjusting. We went over the bill yesterday that proposes to cap school spending for 2 years. And so I have Commissioner Saunders on first. Jill, I'm gonna see.
Yes, so Secretary Saunders got split over to Senate Ed, so we are dividing and conquering.
Oh, he did not tell me. We had lunch just so we know what each other is doing.
Yeah.
Try and stay on the same page.
We have not yet mastered our cloning program that we've been working on for the last 2 years.
Yeah, when you learn how.
Yes, absolutely. So for the record, Jill Briggs Campbell, Deputy Secretary and Chief of Operations for the Agency of Education. I'm joined here today by 2 members of our Ed Finance team, who all have come up and actually be leading most of the kind of report out, and then I can pop back over for the what's next conversation. One thing that I wanted to signal that's a really significant change for the agency between last session and now is we went through a major reorganization. We've shared lots of documents around this, always happy to come back and talk about it. But one of the areas that we really identified was an area of strategic focus for us was around education finance. And so we, as you know, that was really a one-person show for a really long time. And so that limited our ability to provide the kind of, accurate and timely analysis that you all are often looking for to inform your decision-making, and then also provide expanded support to the field. So we've invested with people resources as part of our reorg. And critically, we have filled our education finance director position, and that's Kelly Murphy, who's joining me today. And I'll let her introduce herself and a little bit of her background, and if you all can introduce yourselves so she gets to know you.
Last week in a different.
I believe you did. Yeah, she's a familiar face around these parts. And then also Ted Gates, who's our senior fiscal analyst and is really sort of a counterpart to Jake Feldman, who you all work with really closely from the tax department. We also have, and they'll talk about this, additional staff on that team So we're really feeling like we're moving in the right direction to really expand our capabilities and work really closely with JFO. And Julie, I hope you're feeling that on your end as well. So with that, I will step away. I'm going to let Ted and Kelly step up and introduce themselves, and then I'll be right over here and available to come back.
And just move the chair.
Extra chair,
whatever
yeah.
you need to do.
You're gonna take this up, check.
Even the second chair here is better than most.
Yes, that's nice. Easier.
One in the Health and Welfare Committee creaks, and I expect to see it give way at some point.
It's very uncomfortable.
It is, and it's very uncomfortable. So we try and not penalize our witnesses.
So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and just maybe introduce myself real quick. And then Ted's gonna get the slides up for you, so we can kind of run through the presentation that we have today. But my name is Kelly Murphy. I am the new Education Finance Director. I started last week, so I am brand new. Before this, I was the acting city manager of the city of Montpelier. And in prior roles of the city, I was the assistant city manager and the finance director. And before that, I was in finance management. And so I'm really looking forward to coming back over onto the state side of things at a really critical time. And so I'm super excited to kind of roll my sleeves up and get into it. And with that, I'm going to have maybe Ted click to the next slide here, which just gives you sort of an overview of our team. So you can kind of see, that we've really built things out. Deputy Secretary mentioned that. And so Ted's going to get into some details here, and I'm going to hand it over. Nice to meet you all. I'm happy to answer any questions that I need.
So I'm Ted Gates, Senior Fiscal Analyst. I've been with the agency for about 6 years on the finance side. I worked originally with the rollout of eFinance, the SSDMS project that we had. So in terms of your anticipation of us presenting finance school spending data over the next few months, this is kind of a timeline. So what we collect for the December 1st letter is a very simple preliminary estimated percentage growth rate for the districts that respond to the survey. So we did that in November. We had roughly 2/3 of the districts respond to the survey, representing about 80% of total spending. So it's a pretty robust response rate, I think. And the state average growth rate for ed spending was 5.8%. If you wonder, like, how accurate will that be going forward, I'm not really sure. However, last year, FY26, in that same collection, the growth rate estimate was 5.71%, and actual ed spending growth rate turned out to be 5.73. So in that particular case for that year, it was very close. So perhaps we can count on that again this year. The next data collection that we are just finishing up is the long-term weighted ADM collection. We're at the stage now, we're getting sign-offs from the superintendents, and we're almost at the finish line. So I think we're going to have that probably by next week. The next collection is our preliminary budget collection, where we actually are collecting line item detail now. And we'll hope to have all those budgets in by mid-February, if not sooner. So it's a rolling submission, and as we get submissions to that survey, we can report and make assumptions that are extrapolated on the other remaining districts that haven't submitted yet.
Can I ask what you mean by line item veto?
Line item detail.
Oh, detail. Okay.
Yes,
It's
yeah,
a veto.
yeah.
I'm trying to figure it out.
We don't have that power to.
Dramatic.
And then after town meeting day, and when the votes come in, then we do our final budget collection. And they have the 30-day waiting period. So if the budget doesn't get voted for, that can roll into June before we get those final stragglers. So that's our timeline for collecting and being able to present school spending data to you guys. In terms of the long-term weighted ADM process, sometimes there's sort of a frustration with that process, and we've been trying to make improvements. This year we've made some improvements, and we sent out, we tried to have a very specific set of communications to the stakeholders and superintendents and the data managers within the district and the business managers. And we tried to follow that timeline. We're still a little bit behind, but it was fairly successful this year, I think I can say. So in terms of that process, the data managers at the districts work with our DMAD group, the data management and analysis group at the AOE, and they configure their student enrollments and demographic information and send that to the DMAD group through a process, through a data standard known as EdFi. the actual ADM calculation is a function of this individual student's enrollment status and specific entry and exit dates during the beginning of the school year. It's highly dependent upon the data integrity of their student information systems, and there can be a lot of turnover with the data managers or new data managers, and they're not quite sure on the system. So it's there can be hiccups. The data managers work iteratively with DMAT on sending that data up to the AOE. And then when we get that data, then on the ed finance side, Kelly and I, we calculate the weighting, the long-term weighted ADM. Again, that's an iterative process that the data comes in. So that's shared iteratively by our team with the business managers, and the weighting, just as a refresher, is based on the specific grade levels, pre-K, elementary, middle, and secondary.
New term to me,
Good.
data managers.
Oh,
I'm wondering, because we know we have a broad spectrum of school sizes. And is there a difference in maybe staffing? Do all our district or have data managers, or are you've got?
I wouldn't say that every district has a title like that. Sometimes it's I used to be a data manager at Orleans Southwestern Harvard for 5 years, and so we had that specific position. At one point, my title was something different. At one point, I reported to the IT team, and another for the rest of the time, I reported to the curriculum director. So it depends within each district. It can depend. There might not be a person that, but there is always somebody who manages the student information system and is
Okay.
responsible for reporting that data to the AOE.
Okay.
Wide variability in background and training qualifications, as you would anticipate.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That tells me something. Senator Hardy.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, welcome. It's nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. I'm Senator Ruth Hardy. I wonder, I've heard from a bunch of school districts, particularly last year. So maybe it's better this year, but with significant problems about the free and reduced lunch data.
That's right.
That's where you're going to talk about that. Okay, perfect.
So just as a review, these are the weightings, grade levels, the free and reduced lunch status. Which there's different ways to collect that data. In the end, it's just, were they free and reduced lunch or not? It's yes or no. And then if it's yes, then they get the weighting for that. English language learners, same thing. And then the district's varsity or the population density and the school districts, and then small school fleets. Additionally, within the long-term weighted calculation is early college students. We call it phantoms because we don't have every single student. There's a formula for that. And then state club students also get added to that. This was the timeline that we shared with the superintendent. So, we spelled it out very carefully and we worked with them to establish this timeline. So it started in October 1st. Various steps where we collect the data from their data
Wait, you
managers.
said you were gonna get to it. You didn't answer the question.
I think it's in the.
Oh, is it coming still?
So you were gonna speak to the
Oh.
free reduced lunch.
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of the confusion, if there was any, so yes, so it's the data collection was an iterative process. And there was various different places where there could be data faults. In one case, as we discussed today, that might not be new and it's not configured correctly in their system. I'm honestly not even intimately familiar because it's kind of like being that stuff, but there's a number of different measures that we use to determine the free and reduced lunch status, direct service, the big one, direct certification, like if they're signed up for Medicaid and things like that data flows.
Yeah.
Yeah. In most cases, those things were working correctly. There also could have been situations where the SIS vendor that they were using, whether it was PowerSchool or Infant Campus, didn't have something configured correctly for that particular district or within this or system wide, and it wasn't being, or they didn't configure correctly in their system. It wasn't being counted properly. So there was a number of different areas where there could have been shortfalls in the free and reduced lunch. Systematically overall, though, we did eventually collect all the areas that we should. There was not any drop in free and reduced lunch compared to last year. In fact, free and reduced lunch students as a percent of overall ADM was actually up this year by a small amount. So we did actually collect
Okay.
what we think is accurate.
Well, what I was hearing from districts in my area was that they were reporting the data correctly and they were checking their systems, but when they were getting the data back from you to you AOE,
Yeah.
they were getting incorrect data for pupil weighting
It's
by a
possible.
significant amount,
So it
like
would
a
be-
lot of
yeah.
error.
And so one area that so I said there could be an issue with their SIS or the data manager, and that was a third area I didn't intentionally forgot, but it could be that the algorithms over on the DMAT side, depending on which SIS vendor it was and how EdFund was working, the free reduced lunch calculations might not have been working correctly. So by the time that data came to me, my process has been the same ever since day one, and it's correct. So, but there could have been issues with how the DMAT group working with specific vendors on those free reduced lunch determinations.
So are you doing any kind of auditing, or are you doing any kind of checking? Because it was
Yes, they had to.
significantly off.
But Senator, I think actually what's really important here is that there is a process.
Jill, I need.
Oh, sorry.
Introduce yourself for the record. You can sit there.
Reintroduce myself, yeah.
but
So
who's
again,
speaking?
for the record, Jill Briggs Campbell. So I think it's important to clarify how these processes work. So the first and what Ted is really signaling here is that the vast majority of inputs for long-term weighted ADM come from districts, and we know that there are significant data quality and process impediments. And Senator Cummings, you actually signaled some of those which have to do sort of with the training and background. We've heard from data managers, they rely on actually the registrar in schools, many of whom are not trained on the input of this data. We've identified things like the household income form is actually the obligation of their food service director, and they're not necessarily speaking to their data managers, right? So we had an example this year of about several dozen paper income forms sitting on someone's desk that never made it into their student information system. So we've already identified that there's issues in the districts, and we will continue to work with them on improving the data quality. I'm going there.
I appreciate this.
So
Jill.
Senator, I'm going there, just,
Well, can I respond? Because I don't think you're hearing me.
no, I am, and I'm laying out what the process is. So if you can permit me to answer your question. Once we receive that, in the past, the way that this worked, this was in the past, and we've changed this process, is that the data managers submit the data, and then the long-term weighted ADM calculations were produced in a spreadsheet and sent to business managers. And it's really at that point in the process that those significant errors or variability was identified. So the data was submitted, and then the business managers said, whoa, wait a minute, this is way off from last year. Then they would come back, the data managers would fix the data, it would be resubmitted, a new version would go out. We identified that this was not the process that was working, right? So last year, midstream, we actually at the leadership level said, everybody stop how you're doing this. We actually need the ADM to be verified and certified by data managers and superintendents, because that's the data that matters. And then we're going to ask that the long-term weighted ADM is verified and certified by business managers and superintendents. What I'm going to hear is that that process may have identified some issues that may have happened. Maybe district level issues, it may be our EdFi system wasn't intaking correctly. No one was ever asked to sign off or certify on inaccurate data. So the final long-term weighted ADM certification was data that was validated and certified by business managers and superintendents. So that's what I'm signaling here, is that there was a messy process. There always was a messy process. This year, and this is what Ted was actually laying out, and you'll see over the next several slides, is we really codified this into a very particular process with very particular deadlines that relied on that ADM data, which is the critical input, had to be, again, reviewed, validated, and certified by data managers and superintendents. And at the same time, to avoid this, whoops, we caught this at the end, Ted and his team created a calculator tool that business managers could use to work with their data managers to kind of get more real time. We're submitting this data, it's spitting this out. And we really asked for our district partners, they should be working together on their end as they're seeing these discrepancies, and then they come in and make corrections. So by the time we're getting to the place where we are now, we have one final certification of the ADN, and 48 of our 52 districts have signed off. And one final certification of long-term weighted ADM. And we've got, I think, the numbers on that as of
Yeah.
today. So I'm answering your question, but what I'm signaling is that nobody was ever asked to validate, certify, or sign off on data that was incorrect. We went through the process
Okay.
of correcting that data.
Okay, I guess I get to decide if you've answered my question, not you. And then, but what I'm hearing from you is that you think that the problems are at the district level. And
Not necessarily.
what I heard from my district was that the problems were at the AOE level and that you were sending back incorrect data when they've sent you the correct data. And so perhaps this year, it sounds like you have a better, different process. So perhaps you have fixed that process. I hope that's true. And I appreciate that you're looking at systems. Sounds like you've done a lot of work to try to fix that. You've been on both sides of the
On my side, again.
of the calculus.
I can speak to the DMAP and
But what I heard was that the data that districts were getting from AOE was incorrect for a number of districts and significantly incorrect. So hopefully your new system or new processes will fix that.
So I wasn't saying that. I acknowledge that the issue may have been on our side, but what I was describing was a process whereby when we identify an issue with data, that our team works with the districts to identify what that issue is, to identify where the correction needs to happen, and then resend out the data. That's a data collection process, right? The data never comes in perfect, clean, and quality, never on the first try. It never happens from the districts that way. And if we've identified an issue with our algorithms or the way that the Ed5 was ingesting the data, then we fix that on our end. And then we resend it back out and check. So I was describing a process.
Right, thank you.
Let's move this to the ones.
Okay. So this was the timeline that we shared with superintendents and worked with them on. And high level, again, it was kind of a two-part process. We collected the data from the student information systems in the first box. Data managers and superintendents signed off on that first. Immediately afterwards, I send them a document and the business managers and superintendents sign off on one single number, which has been long-term weighted for fiscal year 27. And so that's where we're at right now. It's in the final throes of getting the signature for right long-term weighted. Okay. And these are the counts where we're at as of yesterday or the day before. The first line ADM, those are the sign-offs for the actual student information data. 48 out of 52 complete, and then the second line, long-term weighted ADM, I have to catch up to them. I've been preparing this presentation, for example, and I haven't been working with the districts, but we still have at least 2/3 of the data, the districts that have signed up on the long-term weighted ADM. I anticipate getting close to 100% by next week. Okay. Okay, so moving on now. So in terms of collecting school spending data for fiscal year 27, the only thing that we have collected so far was for the December 1st letter. And again, that was just a single percentage estimate for their spend and increases in education spending. So if I plot that data in this graph, that's the blue line. So the blue line is every single district. And you can read on the blue line off of the left axis. So those are the percent increases in ed spending. So it ranges from anywhere from 1 to 2% on the low end, up to 12 to 14% on the high end. For the districts that did not respond to the survey, we just superimposed the state average, which was 5.8%. So that's why there's all those blue dots in the middle that it's a straight line, versus assuming that they're using the state average. And of course they won't. It's simply higher or lower. But for now, that's what we did.
Is this on the slide deck that you see? I don't see this slide.
Oh, I don't think that what was submitted.
I don't know. This slide isn't, I don't see it.
Okay, we'll make sure that you get the very updated version. I thought that we had sent this over this morning.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So again, blue line represents the percent increase in ed spending. The green line, if you're wondering, well, like which districts are these? So the horizontal axis, it's the letters would be way too small to say the name of each district. So I sorted the spending just by lowest to highest. So it's just the bottom axis is just the number line. You can ignore it. But the green line represents the size of each district corresponding to their dot on the blue line. So for example, the high spending districts on the left were generally speaking, their ed spending increase was fairly low, less than the average by 20%. So that's where some of the bigger districts were. And then way at the high end, it's kind of a mix of low to medium spending or low to medium size districts. Does that make sense? And then in the middle, the ones that we just extrapolated, they didn't respond to the survey. Apparently seems to be kind of small pieces.
This is just raw education spending, not
Right, correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So does that make sense? The green line and the blue line? Yep. The green line represents the size of the district,
Okay,
and the blue line is their ed spending increase amount from 26 to 27. Okay. So then using the long-term weighted ADM numbers that we have today, we do have numbers for pretty much all the districts. I take their ed spending from the previous slide, divide that by long-term weighted ADM to get ed spending per pupil using long-term weighted ADM. Again, I rank that lowest to highest, and that's again the blue line. So that's FY27. The orange line is FY26, just for comparison purposes, ed spending per long-term weighted ADM. They look the same. Obviously, FY27 is a little bit higher. And again, the green line is the size of the district. So in terms of ed spending per pupil, it looks like the biggest districts in the state are kind of in the middle. And then, there's not, if you're looking at the green line, there's not really a strong path. The big districts appear to be, but there's not really sort of correlate. It's not like all the small districts on one end and all the big districts on the other end. They're just kind of scattered. The red line represents the FY27 excess spending threshold. It's about 16,500 roughly. So looking at this data, it looks like there's going to be quite a number of districts on the blue line that are above the excess spending threshold. However, when you do the excess spending calculation, they get to deduct the spending that they have on the expenditures that they have for principal and interest payments for any bonds prior to July 1st of 2024. So after you deduct the exclusions from their ed spending, it's looking like we were at the basketball meeting this morning and we took a quick little poll, and it looks like there's only going to be about 4 or 5 districts that at this moment are looking like they might be over the excess spending threshold, and some of them are working towards lowering their numbers so that they don't cross that threshold. Last year there was about 6. I think that's reflected in an upcoming slide. Any questions on this slide or this data?
It would be helpful, I think, to be able to see a couple years like that. I think the question is, we lowered the excess spending threshold.
Yeah.
We've got a proposal to cap.
Yeah.
It's also been suggested we lower the, I think the question is that a deterrent? Have we got fewer schools doing that this year than last year? And who are the schools? We've got a bunch of smaller, but some mid-sized schools, even some large ones that are coming up on that line. So what is the driver?
I think that districts do try that the excess spending threshold is effective as a deterrent. I think that most districts, just listening to the business managers talk about it, they don't want to, they don't become popular with their voters, their community voters, they cross that threshold.
No.
So it is a
But
deterrent.
locally, there's been some discussion.
Yeah.
Your district in particular.
The penalty was on pause last year, isn't that right?
No,
The
year
penalty was
before,
last year,
year
but
before.
yeah,
It was
during
in
the
effect last year,
COVID
not the year
years.
before.
Yeah, it was
went
paused during
on
COVID.
When we did the weighting, so that schools that
Yeah.
saw a sudden jump didn't get nailed, but no, it went back in. Yeah, we did it the year before, but it was in last year.
Yeah, so last year, so it's on one of these bullet
The
points. but
first
last-
painful year
yeah,
dealing with.
last year, I think there was about 6 that were over. So
Yeah.
I think it's like the next to last. The middle bullet point in FY26, 6 districts were over by anywhere from $400 to $1,500 over the threshold. Just reading through the bullet points. So the excess spending threshold, again, is only applied to end spending after the excluding principal and interest payments. The calculation is 118% of the average spent, the current statutory threshold is 118% of FY 25 expenditures adjusted annually for inflation. In FY 26, there were six districts over the threshold. In 26 was 15,926, and this year it's 16,470. And as you said, when it was last in place back in fiscal year 21, it was 18,756. And if you had carried that forward, building indexing into inflation, it would be well over 20,000 by now under that old model, and it's actually down at 16.
That's
So
where
it is
our highest
lower. Yeah. Yeah.
The weighting is totally different.
Yeah, the way, yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
That's right.
It's a good point. And we won't know, like, again, we did a quick random poll. There was 4 or 5 districts maybe, but we won't know until we actually collect them.
The final budgets are voted, actually,
Yeah, yes, yeah,
which might not be in March.
right. So again, for moving on to cost drivers, when we collect the data in November in the survey, there's some check boxes with some pre-populated cost drivers that they can select. So it's not they don't get ranked, it's not quantitative, it's just anecdotal. Yes, these are cost drivers that we identify with. And so obviously salary growth and health insurance were common items. This morning, districts were discussing the pressures from the NEA on their ability to manage salaries over time. So that was an issue that came up this morning. And then again, same thing with health insurance. You know, it's something that's beyond their control, and so they can't
And I
load that.
serve on the, guess it's gone, I don't serve on the Commission on Future Public Education. And one of the few things everyone agreed on was that separating the discussion of benefits, i.e. health insurance, and salaries was a real deterrent, at least for local schools, into having any control, because there was nothing to trade off. And the agreement was that they should be done together, but they couldn't reach agreement on at what level, a statewide or a local level, but that it was separated out with thought that especially smaller schools were ill-equipped to go into bargaining with essentially the NEA, who has professional arbiters and mediators, and that doing it at the state level would, balance the playing field. But it might be worth taking a look at how that's worked out. I've heard that several of larger private schools have left the state system and are actually saving money. So I think that would be worth looking at. And if they could save money by leaving, why can't the rest of it?
I will add that our employees pay more.
We also, when we held our statewide strategic planning retreat in November, so we had over 9% of our districts attended, legislators were there, state board members. And one of our kind of breakout sessions was around, if we were looking towards fewer districts, what are some of the major areas of focus? There was actually a very strong consensus from superintendents, business managers, that, and this is reflected in our report that we provided to you all, was a look at some of these policy decisions. And one of them that there was a strong consensus on was a statewide teacher contract or a statewide teacher salary schedule, and tying health benefits as part of that bargaining package to it. So we've also heard that from the field. We heard it echoed again today at the VASBO meeting. So this is an area that they are identifying as a cost pressure for them. And there's policy decisions that could be made that would actually help to alleviate some of those pressures.
Also, anecdotally this morning, some folks raised again tuition increases, whether it was independent schools or tech centers, that those are things that they can control. But
So, sorry, what was happening this morning? Were you in?
the
House
Vermont
ed?
Association of Business.
Okay.
Yeah, they're monthly meeting.
Sorry, as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's always a good place to get on ground. Straight talk.
Okay. Cost, again, on the thread of cost drivers. This is just a snapshot look at expenditures. This graph is actually from FY 24 data, but it's not going to change drastically from one year to the next. So this kind of obviously shows the salaries and benefits are the major single expense for districts. So coming in roughly at like roughly 3/4 of their expenditures for salary and benefits. And then purchase services and then the other segments. And then, so this is a point in time looking at the growth rate for these different, sorry, I should also mention, this is not their total expenditures. This is just their general fund. So when we look only at their general fund, that kind of tries to focus in on their ed spending amount, because pretty much 100% of their ed spending amount is in their general fund. So this is not total expense, like this excludes federal expenditures, for example, but still. So trying to keep the attention on the ed spending amount. So again, it's still the same general fund monies. This is the growth over 5 years from 2020 to 2025. So the 5-year growth, and this is by what we call object codes on the left. So the object codes are salaries, benefits, various purchase services, supplies, property, debt payments.
Now,
So,
this
yeah.
is interesting because we've been told that it's health insurance, which is the base benefit, is growing. But it's not growing according to this, but if the purchase property services, professional services, if you weren't purchasing them before, then the starting point is 0. Because if not, some of them are going up faster than insurance.
Yeah, but they're a much smaller proportion of. the
Oh, yeah,
budget.
much
Absolutely.
smaller
Yes.
proportion of the
Yeah.
budget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it puts increases into, it's not just health insurance that is increasing its cost.
So-
The impact on the whole budget is different. but-
Yeah, and I'd like to provide a real world example that we saw come through really clearly when we were doing our special education reporting and strategic planning. So we know that special education is an area in the workforce where there's severe workforce shortages, right? And the result, but it's also a mandatory service, right? So there is no negotiating what happens there. If a student has a service that's needed on their IEP, the district must deliver, right? And so one of the results of that shortage is that we've seen an increasing reliance on contracted services, which oftentimes can be 3 times as much. So that may be some of that growth is lacking the in-house professional services in districts for critical areas. And we know that in special education, that is a cost driver.
Is that included in the purchase professional services?
Yeah.
The
Mhm.
sort of contracted with.
Yeah, a contracted speech pathologist,
Yeah.
right? And we know those services are often being provided, particularly in rural areas, say in like a teleservice, but you still actually have to have an adult in the room.
Yeah.
So we're talking about like double, right?
Does that also include the line 3 there? Does that also include, the purchase services at therapeutic schools, or would that be considered tuition? Where would that fall?
I think that would be under tuition.
Tuition, yeah,
And that's not up here.
yeah.
And the
Well, it's
salary-
the-
Well, it
it's
is
the fifth
other
line.
purchase
It's the
services.
fifth.
other, it's at the bottom,
Yeah.
other,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
No.
Okay.
The 56.
Oh, I see, I'm sorry. This slide is also not in that.
Oh, apologies.
Okay.
The salary,
Late breaking
that
slides.
administrative, is that administrative paraprofessionals?
All salary.
Oh,
All salary.
Have you found inconsistencies at all in how schools or districts report purchases in terms of how they classify it in what subject area?
Yes, there's always.
This is
the-
Ted's
There's always.
albatross.
Yes.
So our state auditor 20 years ago, and I remember we pointed out that as a consistent problem in education, and every time I've looked at it since, it hasn't improved.
Yeah.
Well,
And
you have
problem.
a uniform chart of accounts.
Yeah, the problem with
We're getting
inconsistency.
there.
They use the same chart of accounts as how
Yeah.
they used it.
Yes, exactly, yes.
Yeah.
So you can institute a chart of accounts, but then people interpret it differently, code
Yeah.
things differently. And
Yeah.
we have We have a committee of business managers that we call the handbook committee, because we have a great big handbook that describes the UCOA and all the other related components. And they meet monthly to discuss issues like that and try and arrive at more consistent coding using the UCOA for things. There's still
Another
there's still
20
going
years.
to be,
Yeah.
there's still gonna be
Well,
differences.
I think that one thing I'll sort of observe in just kind of my shorter time in this space, it's only been about 3 or 4 years that I've been really engaged in from chart of accounts and beginning to understand it, is as you all are asking questions, policy and decision making is really starting to really hone in on this. A great example that we ran into last year was everybody wants to quantify the cost of mental health services. And there is no code, right? There's no code for that. And we went out to the field and we actually were like, okay, here's a methodology that we could use. And if you ask the business managers, they'd be like, yeah, okay, we could see that. But the second you ask people who actually are doing the programmatic work, they're like, oh, no. You're missing all of these expenses, right? And they're not coded in the same way. So we've identified that as the use of this information becomes so much more consequential, there's additional, number one, it's training and standardization of how they code it, and then additional refinements within their systems that would help us to, it would be great if we could someday say, everyone's going to code mental health. If you're doing these activities, that is a mental health cost. But if you're doing these activities, that goes over here. And we're just not there yet. But I think that we have agreement about the stakes around this data are much higher than they used to be. And so the refinement really needs to happen. So it's going to be a process. I hope it's not 20 years.
Well, I mean, one of the major
You have
problems
both
of the
yours.
process is looking at individual schools.
Yes.
And looking at their numbers compared to other similar schools, and you can make very wrong conclusions
Yeah.
on the basis of data that's inaccurate.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm on a school board, so I sit in or am adjacent to those negotiation discussions. And so I'm really interested in the salaries, figures. It's just an observation. This is a 5-year look back and that coincides with COVID. And there's been a tremendous amount of pressure on the fact that teaching during COVID became really difficult and post-COVID as well. Fewer people wanted to go into teaching position of teaching, profession of teaching. And there was maybe at least a small exodus. So there was definitely pressure for this profession to be compensated maybe in a different way or looked at differently, et cetera. And I'm wondering, do we have data pre-5 years that would just help us understand if COVID has been a driver that I'm envisioning anyway?
I think short answer is yes, we have data, but because we instituted the Uniform Credit Accounts in 2020, then doing the comparison could introduce some difficulties that would make it difficult to compare side by side, but it's possible.
We know that anecdotally though, as well, because I was very much involved with those funds. Districts took very different approaches to that teacher retention issue, right? So some of them did pay raise increases across the board, which now are built forever into their pay scale, their COLA, their retirement. And some districts did one-time bonuses or hiring bonuses. That was probably the best practice. And it was nationally that was sort of put forward as a best practice. I don't think that all districts did that. And so I would say, as with all things in Vermont, I think it depends on the district. But there's certainly, you are signaling something correct. During COVID, there's a real upward pressure on salaries. And at the time, they were flush with money to do it. And we kept going fiscal cliff, right? But it's really hard when you're managing a global pandemic and you're managing the pressures in schools, which absorb so much of it, to not use those dollars in that way, and even knowing what you're setting yourself up for. So I think probably folks with the best of intentions may have made some short-term decisions that have really big long-term impacts.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
I find it interesting that other than property, the item up there that has the least percentage increase is the one that we're hearing about from the districts as the tuition. It's gone up to less than 1% than all the other ones. Yet they're citing that as a problem.
I think, again, it depends on the district, right? So,
Sure.
This is also all districts and not all districts pay tuition. So
Okay.
the districts that do pay tuition, it could be a really big cost driver for them.
Oh.
But districts that don't pay tuition, it would be a
But
zero.
does that include therapeutic?
I think that, yeah.
So that would be almost all districts.
Yeah, but you know, they could have one or two kids versus
Yeah.
like a district that tuitions almost everybody or everybody.
and again, we also heard differential impacts for CTEs, right? Some CTEs are charging significantly more in tuition, but we all need to tackle that system,
That-
right?
I mean, that's
Yeah.
a big issue in my area. So
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
it depends on the region and what you're doing.
I think the impacts are very different.
I think I'm gonna move us on.
Look, we finished. Question?
Finish.
I always love that one.
Okay, well,
They never have questions.
first, I hope we will have you back. This committee's gonna have to figure out financing. The governor's sticking with, I don't know if it's 5 districts or just some districts or what. But at some point, we're going to have to get some hard numbers as to how much money we would save, where would we save it, as opposed to, we know it's gonna cost more in transportation.
Well, not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Yeah, but a good question.
Yeah, I mean, because arguably, if we went to a foundation formula, then schools, when they have a limited budget, they couldn't export costs onto the ed fund, would have to make some of these decisions, which now we are being asked to make for them. And I'm trying to figure out the numbers, because if maps come to us, that's what we're gonna have to figure out is, are we saving? Are we saving enough? Is it enough to make any difference on the tax rate? Is it enough to offset the just stress and change turmoil that individual schools and districts are going to have to go through? It will be disruptive, and it will be, a few years from the new routine and reality. What did we call it? The future state. For all of us to get used to living in the future state. And so it's, I'd like to see the numbers that assertion is based on, that by going to the bigger districts, however many you want to choose, will save us enough money to bring that tax rate down significantly. Okay. That's our another hand. No, I guess it was just with.
Do you guys have data yet on federal funding and the loss of federal funding? I mean, it was mentioned in one of the slides, but I didn't see numbers associated with it. I know that that's.
So as of right now, what exactly like our, I think we were here in May, like one of our last testimony, we are still in that state right now. So right now, in terms of dollars coming from ed and USDA, we have no change because they forward fund. Congress has not made any move in any direction that we could say, this is where they're going. So we are literally in exactly the same place that we were in May, which is that Senate proposed one budget bill, House proposed another, the administration proposed something close to House, and they've done nothing on it since.
Well,
So-
there was Medicaid changes, so I think there's gonna be
It
a
doesn't
loss.
impact
in
the
that.
school-based Medicaid
It doesn't,
program.
okay. That's what I saw on the ed fund outlook, a decrease in Medicaid. But Sorry,
Well,
Julia.
we can, yeah, Julie and I will
We'll-
triangulate on that, but we've been working with our partners in AHS and we are
Okay,
not anticipating any major change. In fact, we're looking to expand the use of school-based Medicaid with some kind of major reforms.
okay.
Okay, I mean, I hear things, it pops up. On special ed and the Department of Special Ed is being wiped out or it's not being wiped
No.
out. So to date, I would see that as maybe our most vulnerable place that
Yeah.
they've never come through with the money they said they'd do and they mandated special ed. But that's a place that they have failed.
I would be, so OSEP, which is the Office of Special Education, is, as of right now, we're not seeing a lot of change at the federal level. IDEA is a funding program, looks to be at least level funded. All the proposals, no one's looking to gut IDEA, a fairly bipartisan program, right? But I always do want to remind us, these federal funds are really, really important. But when we're talking about the overall, like the percent within our system, we're talking about 5 to 10%. So it's important money. It's money that's supposed to go to our most vulnerable students, but as a portion of our entire education funding system, it's not very much. As a portion of like the impact on the Agency of Education, it's important, right? We actually have a lot of folks whose job it is to manage and run these federal programs. They're funded with federal dollars. Part of our reorganization was actually to help insulate us from these impacts. We're keeping a very close eye on it. Where I think we might anticipate seeing reductions. And again, this is like crystal ball stuff. We really don't know. Would be around Title II, which is professional development funds. We actually utilize those funds to do some of those big statewide initiatives like literacy that we all want. There's no money in our appropriations, so we use those dollars, right? We're quite scrappy about this. We probably should anticipate a reduction in the title that supports migrant education.
Yeah.
I don't think that's, all that surprising. Maybe English language learners. So we will absolutely continue to come back to you just as we did all last session, but it's sort of like we're at where we were at the end of last
The
session.
core, at this point, our core education funding. We tend to, 10 to 15% increase, but, we're not anticipating everything just going down the tubes.
No.
We aren't that dependent.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, there's other states where this has a much larger impact than ours. Those are higher poverty states. I do, just to your sort of original question around modeling, right? We'll continue to work really closely with JFO, and I know Julia would signal all the unknowns, right? Until sort of specific policy decisions are made, it's always really hard to model some of these things out. And the one sort of thing I want us to be thinking about a little bit as we're having these conversations, it's something that I think about a lot, is we have a couple of districts that are approaching that 4,000 mark, which is scale based on, remember what's called the evidence-based model. It's the Picus and Auden model. There was a reason you all chose 4,000 to 8,000. It is a research-based, evidence-based approach, right? So there is real, 30 plus years of research to back that. But what I would say is, even our districts that are operating at scale as a district system have a lot of small schools, very small class sizes, and are not as necessarily, despite their best efforts, because this is not a criticism of those districts, are not staffing with the level of precision that we would want our districts to do, right? So while it's helpful always to look at some of our larger districts, even they would say, we still have some systems constraints that's just part of our system, right? We acknowledged last year when we brought forth our proposal, it was a proposal that contemplated our exact building portfolio, including all the small schools, right? So I just want us to caution that as we're thinking about like, what is our basis? What is our cost savings? It's not just reducing administrative overhead. Yes, that will save some dollars. shared contracted services. I actually don't know whether or not transportation would be more or less expensive in a consolidated system. I think it might actually be less and we might be able to provide more services. We need to do that analysis, right?
Right.
But we actually fundamentally need to make some changes in how we operate our systems. You all acknowledge that with class size minimums. That was actually a move that you made in policy that is acknowledgement of the inefficiencies
And
inherent
that
in our
was the-
system.
Forward, right? That is not contingent.
Yes, that is so FY 27 is the first year. I set up a class size working group with the field. We're working on refining definitions based on Act 73. What is our data collection and reporting? What's the cycle so that they can inform their FY 28 budgets? There's a lot of districts that are doing it. They're putting forth very unpopular budgets that are compliant with Act 73. No one's getting there the first year, right? That's okay. But we're going to make progress towards it and we're going to be very sort of clear and transparent. So I'm happy to come back in another time and give you an update on that work, but it's good work. It's underway with the field and they're trying to make those moves, right?
Because I understand until you have a specific district map to.
We've got
work on, it's, yeah. But for us to set a policy.
Yeah.
Which is emotionally very difficult because people read that and probably rightfully so. Because in many areas, we are over-schooled. We have too many schools for the number of students we have in that area. But if we can't show them that they will save money, and I think when we did Act 46, we dropped the ball. We just said, okay, this is it. We've done it. We all went home. And we didn't take it up again until it hit crisis. And so we can't look at that and say that was a success. Everyone agrees. If you look at the map, there's a quilt hanging on the wall over there, freedom and unity, and it's a patchwork of Vermont, but it's that's what our school governance structures look like. And this is a large and very difficult social change for people. I just moved here when they closed the varied city schools. It was one every 3 blocks, I think, and there used to be enough kids there. I mean, Barry has lost, Montpelier's lost hundreds since I was there. Barry's lost thousands. And they've lost that in students. But it was painful. But it was one very small area where you could calculate. And we're gonna have to get that much more specific, I think, as to what this will mean. Again, it may not mean we're gonna cut your taxes. It may mean they just won't go up as much as they used to. Because inflation keeps going up. We're trying to get a handle on healthcare. We did a couple of big things last year. But that's a national problem. We're worse than many, but we need to start getting some.
We're very
hard
well prepared to support that modeling in partnership with JFO. So
Okay.
we're ready for this.
Okay.
We
well, that
can do
I
this.
will
We
get you.
we need
back
some
into
decisions.
that.
Yeah.
We'll, let us know when you're ready to come in and we will get you in. Thank you. Okay.
Madam Chair, I really appreciate you bringing up the larger districts with school closures, because I am in the second. I am in a district with this, probably the second largest school districts in the state, and one of my districts did close an elementary school. And they did exactly what they should do. They turned it into their own therapeutic school, which is a great use of that space. our district is, we're definitely monitoring our student population drop and our declining enrollment and thinking about and openly thinking about at our board meetings, closing the school. So it's, you know, something that is out there in the ether, and we're preparing our community for the possibility of that happening. We're doing it thoughtfully, we're doing it collaboratively, and sort of prepping people for that possibility. I don't want to say inevitability because you don't know. We are building a lot of apartments in Burlington, but I really love everything you're saying, and I agree so much with your desire for reform. Right now, I'm looking at what Natural Resources is doing with their mapping for land use. And I'm thinking to myself, why couldn't education have a similar kind of really super robust mapping process, similar to the land use model? Because it sounds absolutely amazing. And as someone who sat for 4 months trying to draw maps with our task force, I often felt that longing for like that kind of a process. So I just had to get that out there. I think we were given short shrift in a 4-month process to draw lines on a map. It just didn't feel fair. And it certainly didn't feel professionally, like it didn't feel right. You know, we weren't using all of the various resources that we could have, and we weren't getting the engagement from local communities, even though we did have the public hearings and everything. The process for land use is much more deep and much more robust. And so I just want to put that out there. I wish we could have given ourselves the time to do it properly.
Watch the video.
Fine.
Land use has been mapping for a long time.
I think, you know, we've put off hard decisions for a long time, right? And so now it feels like an emergency, but you know, it's really identified, like it, we know what the obstacles are, and we know what the issues are. And, you know, I'll sort of leave on a final, yeah, I mean, it was, so I met with, Randy Lowe, and I asked her if I could share this, this superintendent for, Bennington Rutland. And as you may know, they actually just went through a process of voting to close several of their schools, and they went through an 18-month process, right? And, they kind of did a straw poll of their towns. They said, we don't want to close our schools. They made the case, you know, looking at student outcomes, looking at opportunities for students for 18 months. The town said no, but it wasn't binding. And the school board was frankly very courageous and voted to close their schools. And I was talking to Randy about this and her school board chair, and they said, as leaders, this was really, really challenging for us. But now our job is to prove the value of our decision for the people in those towns, right? And I think, like, Senator Cummings, to what you were speaking about and what the governor was talking about with Barry, right? It was hard, but the value then has to be proven to the families, the students, the communities, right? We understand the fears, like we are not tone deaf to what the fears are and the change. And we have to show the opportunity and show the value of this opportunity. And
They closed, I don't know. They closed their elementary schools. There's one's a Head Start Center.
Yeah, another is the senior living, one is the historical society, and then now our schools operating at scale, right? That are able to offer programs that they weren't before, right? And so I just thought that what Randy said, what Superintendent Lowe said it's exactly kind of the approach that we're taking is we get it. You know, I wish that we had another 15 years to bring everybody along, right? For 15 years, but we already have 15 years worth of decline in student outcomes. We feel real urgency here that we cannot allow for a process that might take another 10 to 15 years. And it's not just the rising costs of the system. There's cost in terms of student outcomes, opportunity, and quality in having a fragmented system.
And that would help if because it's not an attack on teachers,
It is not.
but we used to have the highest one of the highest in the country, the highest in New England, high school graduation rate. The concern was we had one of the lowest continuation rates. We are now seeing we are the worst in New England in high school graduation rates. I've been told, and it's pretty good authority, that it is young white males, rural males, without a high school education in a rural state, unless you want to take over and do the job all our illegal farm workers are doing, there isn't much of an economic future for you. It's the logging industry is declining. The granite industry, which used to, provide good union jobs for large numbers of people here, has declined, thus Barry's decline. Agriculture is declining, and it's now big business. A few small farms make it, but it's, especially dairy farming, has become much larger. And that's concerning. But the schools especially, and I've heard it from several sources, are concerned they don't get any of their placement things for a year or more, or haven't. I'm not sure what all the tests are. There's national, we do our own. And we're not the education committee, but if we could somehow get a sheet that shows what is happening to our students and perhaps where, Chittenden County is large for Vermont. It's an average school probably for most places. It is wealthier than many portions of Vermont. My county is rational in many ways in its districts, and it is wealthier than many stations as a whole. But if I can paint the picture now that if we do nothing,
Yes.
we're laying off teachers. Barry's town is Barry, they're laying off 2 classroom teachers. We're laying them off. And in some instances, we're hiring other people to fill in.
Yeah.
The present situation is not good for kids in many instances. But I think we also need the ability to show what is possible
Yes.
In a more local fashion.
Yeah, and I think so. We have to recognize that without change, our current system is one that is cut, right? That's the option, cut or spend more. And even spending more, you're still cutting, right? Most of our districts are spending more and cutting
Less.
That is the current system, right? Schools are being closed in remarkably painful ways. Senator Cummings, you live this all the time, right? Teachers are being laid off in a small district rather than could we have in a more rational system. How might you redeploy those teachers? I often talk about, and my staff hears me say this all the time, it's remarkable that we have simultaneously workforce shortages and by far the smallest teacher to student ratios in the nation. Something isn't adding up there. How might you reorganize those teacher resources in a way that is respectful and planful? How can you plan for attrition? We have something like a 5% retirement rate every year. Well, if you do that over 4 years, like there you go. You're actually absorbing some of that attrition rate in ways that are not forcing you to lay off early career teachers that you really want to keep in the workforce, right? How do you raise salaries in high poverty rural districts so the teachers that live there are not driving to chittened in to teach. They're actually staying in their communities because they can make enough to work and live there, right? How might we have a planful, rational system that is not highly fragmented while retaining, everyone's very concerned, and it's understandable, about losing their local identity, but that is not the same as local control, right? Keeping your school's local identity is a goal. We want our schools to have their own vibe, their own community. They're the heartbeat of their community. There is no cookie cutter school in Vermont. That's the whole, we want deep roots in our community, right? But how do we actually have a rationally organized system that is respectful of the people within it, rather than what we have now, which is a system that it's decline, right? It's the status quo is decline. This is where our agency comes from. And this is where we want to keep working with you all. We understand, like, these are really hard decisions, and we understand that when you go home to your constituents, you're hearing a lot of loud and angry and sometimes really scared voices. So we want to work with you on a system that's rational, humane, and respectful. But ultimately, that results in better outcomes for kids. Like, that's our job at AOE, right? Better outcomes for kids.
If you could get us some data on what is going on. Sure.
And I
That-
really
I
recommend
think
that
just
folks read that
individually
that
as
Boston Globe
we
article
would
is a
be
wake-up call for everyone. I really, really hope that folks read that. We actually put out a big press release when it came out, and I think nobody picked it up. It is stark. The Boston Globe article that the governor referenced that says New England schools are declining and nobody seems to care. And Vermont is the decliner. We have the fastest decline in literacy outcomes in the nation.
I don't want to get into a big debate right now, but so I'll just be super brief. We know why we have high or low teacher to student ratios, because we're the most rural state in the country. I mean, that is a big part of it. We have to deliver, and education is part of our constitution. We have to deliver equitable education to every kid, no matter where he or she lives, or they. I just have to say, what I would like you all to prove to me is that we can lower costs and we can lower education spending and improve outcomes.
Sure.
That is a circle in a square. And I have yet to have any proof that that's even possible, because that seems like a fairy tale to me.
Well, so happy to come back.
Yes.
But when we come back, I think we have very clear examples in other states that do this. Much better student outcomes at lower cost per pupil, all of the same issues, right? We have to remember that we are a rural state, but there are states that are just as rural with higher poverty. And they're
I will look forward to seeing that data.
great.
And when we say rural, thing I learned last year is that that is based on the number of towns we have with fewer than 10,000 people, or there's a number, I don't remember it. And we have a lot of towns, but they're a lot closer together in most instances than they are in Montana or Wyoming or Texas.
Yeah.
So where we don't have a lot of people, we have a lot of towns with a few people in them, and many of them have their own schools.
Yes.
But in the distance scale, we're very different than other rural states. And other states, almost every one of them, if not all, have one large metropolitan area. We don't. Burlington is just starting to reach any national standard. We don't have a Kansas City. That is the income generator. New Hampshire has the Nashua, Massachusetts border area, and the rest of the state is empty. It's a different, it's your tax base. And we have a lot of little tax bases. This is the smallest state capital in the country by far. And 8,000 people.
Yeah.
So that I think is one of the differences. We can do more moving people around in a rational manner because there's fewer people, but we're closer together.
You have mountains and rivers and infrastructure.
So does it Montana and Wyoming, bigger ones. I mean, and Texas is mostly flat, but it's 50 miles between ranches. So we need to.
Every state is unique.
Yeah.
But there are just certain fundamentals that are,
Okay,
but we share with other states.
data would be helpful. As for us as we go forward.
Yeah, and I want to remind us that we provided a lot of modeling last year. There's a narrative that's going around that there wasn't modeling. There absolutely was. And we'll come back to it. We'll refine it based on whatever those maps are that you're going to contemplate. There's only so many ways to slice the apple within the constraints of that.
I mean, I think the modeling. I think we
I
got
mean,
you,
we're prepared.
we got you first, and the modeling was happening as
Yep.
it was being
And we
presented.
refined and refined and refined and we
refining.
continue to do so.
And once it left here, this committee didn't get to see final modeling.
Sure.
And there was more modeling going on in the committee of conference. So I think as we start this year, I would like to get as much data in here. A lot of the education stuff is not ours, but we have to develop the financing and we have to be able to justify that with improved educational outcomes.
Yeah. And I think we always have to remember, like, as you've heard us say all the time, right? It's a three-legged stool, right? Changing the funding it's not the only lever. Governance is not the only lever. All of these things have to happen together to ensure that the quality leg of the stool is always held up. So there's a lot of policy moves. This is really complex work, right? It's really complex work. And so, will just having larger districts save everybody money? No, not if we don't change our practices, right? So when we look at some of our larger districts, they continue to staff under 46. They just went everybody in, right? They continue to staff in the same way. They didn't necessarily change their systems, right? So looking to a governance change is not necessarily going to change your spending outcomes if you don't change the way you staff, the way you run your systems, the way you contract, right?
Maybe.
And we built those budgets. We actually have those budgets and we have some.
Maybe what we're missing is the middle piece, is the systems change. What will that look like?
Sure.
Because we have the proposal for the sharing districts, whose name I'm forgetting, but where you would have a central human resources department, and you might have a central data manager, which then would argue you could get a trained data manager who would do better. And I think,
Which improves quality,
right,
specialization
So,
will help to improve quality.
would that model work as well? And we're already 5 minutes over. That model, we've got two models going here. Both are talking about shared, combining services, combining, management at some levels. And so, but would every school share its teacher data with that other school? I don't know. So that may be something. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty.
You all, good conversation to start us off.
Figure out what the difference in all the students.
Would have each one of those.
Okay.
Same chart in-house, they would all be.
Just for having a long time, someone sat and witnessed it.
Have you filled your
Well,
data
no,
acquisition?
there's a lot of-
Some of
The
the-
chairs look old, there's a lot of
Which-
jackets on them.
Which one?
Well, yeah, one, I've seen one.
It's temporary.
Oh, okay, over, yes, I know what you're talking about. Over in our feedback. No, we have not yet.
I know.
We might post the search and then repost.
Okay, we're going to go back and forth, one thing which is called
Okay.
numbers.
Look at. That she's.
No, and I think-
5 minutes.
Well, I don't even know where to start, but I'm not doing a break, it would be a house.
Yeah. Well, I'll just sit here patiently and
Yeah.
think of fun things to say.
I don't, I know, we just keep them now. These here,
Reference another fiscal annual.
Healthcare does that.
We. Great people.
Good afternoon.
Howdy, sir.
The lively presentation at the end of the. Perfect.
Yes. Good. This is talking.
Some of these.
Charlotte, this is talking.
Uh-oh, do you have your time on?
No, I don't. Oh, maybe I.
It is me. It's me.
See, he was logged on back there.
And I was like,
I'm so sorry. No, that's okay.
well,
Charlotte did not make mistakes.
I will say that if education finance doesn't drag you down, I promise you I will.
Looking
No,
forward.
I spent this morning doing this. Yes. Okay. They said they were just getting water, but it gave me 2 more minutes to run to the fountain and run back. I still have water. I'm talking as much as anyone.
I know that you're handing out like appointment things.
Yeah,
You can just assign a couple to me or however many you need to. I might leave because I don't want to hit ice over the mountain.
oh, okay. If
I'm
it is
gonna listen
starting,
to
I
Nolan
said that
and-
yesterday, yeah.
Yeah, but then I'm gonna take off, but just give me whoever you want and
Okay.
just send them to me, Charlotte, if that's okay. Thank
Okay,
you.
no, they'll just be. Yeah, good mind your debt.
I'll do whoever
Wednesday.
one at a
Okay, I think we've only got 3 or 3,
Just don't give all 3 of them to me. One, if you only have 3, just give me
but
one.
I don't know that. Just glancing at them, that anyone was obviously in anyone's district.
Okay,
We have not gotten the big ones. I assume we will get the new tax commissioner and the new
Did we do that last year?
DFR commissioner. But they have not arrived. When they arrive, we will have them in for an interview.
Did we do tax last year?
No, only when they're appointed.
we
Did we
did
do
one
tax?
and
Did we
then-
had maybe we did do shoulder.
Bill, yeah.
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 we did,
Yeah.
yeah.
we
Yeah.
did.
Yeah,
That's
right, right.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
we
it's
did.
just Kai Sampson over DFR that's new. Okay,
So.
well, new to that,
New again. New again.
new again.
I meant it new again. Not old in age.
I think his first day on the job, this committee, mostly the chair. Between he and Rebecca Holcomb were in here on the proposal to make school budgets start all over again and reduce 2%. That I think was the governor's first year. They were both on school boards. I was a little rough on them. I did apologize in the hall. So, I tell you how my reaction was to any proposal to start caps on this year's school budget? Okay, we are ready to go. Nola, you're gonna make us feel really upbeat.
you got it.
Thanks, Mom.
The healthcare provider tax over.
Yes, for the record, Noel Langwell, Joint Fiscal Office.
And you might tell us what the provider tax is.
That's the reason I'm here.
Okay.
So, Jen is here to answer questions which will absolutely come up. Not if they come up, it's when they come up. So let me share my screen. This is the very upbeat presentation I've given today, various subjects. So fortunately, this committee has a very strong stomach. So I don't worry.
This is probably this is the only committee where both the issues of health insurance, the cost of the insurance, the cost of the healthcare is down the hall.
Yep.
2 of us deal with that in the morning, but the cost, the impact on health insurance and education funding, the 2 big heavy issues hit this one committee. So we are going to have a very difficult, and depending on your definition of fun here, but these are there's some major impacts headed that way.
Absolutely. And I just did a fun presentation on health insurance solvency upstairs before I got here, so. But I digress. Today, we're gonna talk about the provider taxes. So the chair's question, what are provider taxes? They are healthcare related taxes. We call them provider taxes, but they're state assessments on healthcare providers. Who those providers are, I will get to that in a future slide. But Medicaid, as a step back, Medicaid is financed through a state-federal partnership. Provider taxes are a revenue source that can be used to generate funds for the state share. But there are rules about how much you can raise. And in terms of federal law, they must comply with federal laws. Just to give you a sense of the breadth of the scope of how big provider taxes are, in fiscal year 25, first of all, provider taxes are deposited into the general fund. They used to be deposited into a special fund called the State Healthcare Resources Fund years ago. For the last 5 or 6 years, they've gone into the general fund. In fiscal year 25, provider taxes accounted for approximately 88% of the state dollars that are used for the Medicaid program. So pie chart 1 are the state share only. So you can see of the state dollars right there, 88% are general fund, 12% are other funds, including tobacco and other special funds. 28% of that general fund shares, 28% of the 88% are provider taxes. To give you a sense of how that is in the bigger scope of the Medicaid budget, I'm not talking that total budget, I'm talking just Medicaid budget. If you add in the federal funds, all Medicaid funds, provider taxes account for 9% of the total funds that we use, both state and federal, just to give you a sense of the breadth, the scope, how big these are. Why is it a big deal? So when we talk about state dollars, that's because we get what's called federal medical assistance percentage. I think everyone here knows what it is, but I will do a quick talk about it. We have multiple FMAPs. We actually have 4 different FMAPs, but there's only 3 listed here. We have our regular match. So it's currently at 58.81 federal, 41.2% state. So what does that translate to? For every dollar we spend on Medicaid under the regular match, we get $1.43 in federal match for a gross of $2.43. So for every $1 we spend on Medicaid, we get $2.43 of product of services provided. By the way, it goes the other way. If you cut $1 out of Medicaid, you lose $2.43 of services. So it goes both ways. The majority of our Medicaid program is that regular match. We have a small sliver, it's 4,400 kids that are in the Children's Health Insurance Program. They have a roughly 70-30 match. And then we have this childless new adult. Don't let the name change you. Basically, this is the Affordable Care Act expansion population. It's about 41,000 people. These are childless adults. Most of these folks were either on VHAB, Catamount, or uninsured prior to the Affordable Care Act going through. And this is 41,000 people, and we get a 90-10 match on this population.
And that was the Affordable Care Act, right?
That was the Affordable Care Act.
We did Catamount
Yes,
to originally over 20 years ago, I think.
it wasn't that
No
long.
way.
No, it started the year before Jen. Actually, close, actually. Because Jen and I started the year after it passed.
Was when I was first in here, and the thing was, if Medicaid covered you if you had children, but if you were young or old working adult and you didn't have minor children and you weren't making enough money to pay for your health care, you were in trouble. And so we expanded. We did Catamount Health, which I don't even remember how we funded it.
We did it through general fund.
Fund,
We did it through the employer assessment.
That's right.
And some of it, and I think it was a percentage of the tobacco dollars.
So we set that up. When the Affordable Care Act came in, they did this bottom one, which it's called expanded Medicaid. Some states haven't expanded Medicaid, but there's obviously a sizable incentive to expand. And we had done it, so Catamount went away.
There's two pieces of this too. There is a group of adults with children that are in the same FPL. And it's around the same number, maybe a little bit less, and they get the regular match. And then these are childless adults, and they get 90/10 match. So, and then the last FMAP that's actually not on here is administrative. That's 50/50. So administrative costs that AHS and DEVA, they can get 50/50 match. This is the fiscal year 26, the current fiscal year FMAP rates. I actually added the fiscal year 27. So we did the budget. This is the rates we're going to use. It actually went down. If you look, federal share was 58.81. The federal share went down by a little bit, 5.807. Translated, that means for every dollar we spend, we have to put more, we get less match.
And that's based on.
So
Base,
what it is, it's a calculation done by the federal government. It's a 3-year average, it's based on a 3-year average of per capita income relative to other states. No state can have a match of lower than 50% or higher than the 83% or something like this. There's some parameters, but like, California, New York, those big states that have high per capita, they're at 50%. States like Mississippi are in the 70s, right? We're kind of in that middle, we're more towards the 50%.
move up a penny here.
Yeah. And, the way I kind of describe it to people is that when our FMAP goes down, which means the federal government gives us a little bit less match, it stinks for the state budget, right? Because a 0.1% is $20 million, right? So it might be $20 million just to maintain the same level of services. However, if our FMAP is going down, it means that our per capita income relative to other states is actually going up. So it means our economy is getting a little bit better, but we're paying for it another way. So from a budgetary standpoint, we're like, dang, our FMAP's going down, but oh, good, our economy's getting better, right? So it's just one way to
Yeah,
look
it
at it.
goes up, gee, our people are getting poorer.
So that's just states around us?
So it's per capita national compared to all 50 states.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
And it's more complicated than that, but this is the easiest way to describe it.
Okay.
So there are, as I mentioned, there's federal parameters, and I'll do my best to describe them, but if you have questions, Jen will absolutely pipe in. So provider taxes, otherwise, if there was no parameters, we would just tax providers and then use that money to match.
For a while till the feds caught on.
So the feds basically have parameters saying, okay, we're going to let you do this, but there are rules about how you do this. So one is it must be broad-based, which means it must apply across the class of healthcare items, services, providers. And I'll show you those list of providers in a minute. It must be uniformly applied, same licensing fees across the class, same bed, for bed licensing, et cetera. So you can't say UVM, you pay this, Kapu, you pay that, and everybody gets taxed the same. There can't be a hold harmless for providers. You cannot guarantee directly or indirectly that the tax paid will be returned to the provider. So it can't say properly, hey, you're paying $1 million in provider tax, but wink, wink, don't worry, you'll get it back. That's illegal. You can't do that. The way they get it back, all of them do, is in their Medicaid utilization. Right? So if you have a high Medicaid group, you will get more Medicaid reimbursement. If you have low, you'll get less Medicaid reimbursement. There's not a relationship where don't worry, you're going to get it back. And that's illegal.
There were nursing facilities in the state that do not accept Medicaid.
Mm-hmm.
They get charged, but that's their choice. But if they're in your district, you might hear from them.
Several years ago, the provider tax, and I'll get to this, it's maxed out at 6%, but years ago, we had it at 5.9%. But we increased it to 6%. And what we said to the providers at the time was that money we make from the increase, we're going to put back into rates. But we're going to say that since you're paying $1 million more, you're going to get $1 million back. We said, no, we're just going to put that into rates. So some of them got that back in rates and some of them didn't, but it went into rate increases.
It helped the poorer hospitals that has more Medicaid.
Yes. And so the cap is 6%. It's called the safe harbor because we call it the cap, but there are rules. If you go over 6%, then there's, they might audit you. Anyway, we just don't go above 6%, right? And this is going to get into what's in HR 1, which we'll get to at the end. This provision, to talk about HR 1, will change in fiscal year 2028. My last slide is all about HR1 and what that looks like. So these are the provider classes. These are all the classes that you can tax under the provider tax regulations. The red ones are the ones that we in Vermont actually tax. So we have inpatient, outpatient, it's actually combined. That is the hospital provider tax. It's those two combined. Nursing facilities, we have the intermediate care facilities, which by the way, they're technically on the books. We don't actually have any more intermediate care facilities anymore, so we're not getting any revenue from them. But the law itself is still on the
So
state
the
books.
outpatient, what are the urgent care?
Urgent care, independent urgent cares, they don't get taxed.
Okay, but the hospital has one out here in the Barrymont area.
If it's part of the hospital, it gets
Yeah.
taxed as part of the hospital.
Okay,
It's part of their net patient revenue. But if it's
the
an
private
independent,
ones don't get taxed.
you know,
They're not on here.
so
They're not on here.
they're not a class that we can actually.
They are not an outpatient, or, all right, they're not hospital services. Okay.
Yeah. So we have all of these, again, the inpatient, outpatient is combined, the intermediate care facilities, they're on the books, but we don't actually tax them. Home health used to be taxed. We actually took that away several years ago. We do prescription drugs and we do EMS services. And to that point, I'll show you what we actually.
Just a quick one on that one, Nolan. So like normally on your bill, you have a facility fee and a professional fee,
You would show up. Provider tax would not show up on your bill.
but in that bill, developing that bill, you only get charged on the facility fee, not the physicians, the professional part of it, the physician service.
You're getting into a subject that I don't, to a hospital billing.
Well, like how the tax, like
The tax,
does the physician's services,
I would say the way the
which is
tax
the
is,
professional charge.
I would say it's similar to a business, right? When you're trying to figure out how much my product costs, you're gonna build that into your cost. Right? So my widget costs $100 in there. It's the cost of development, it's the cost of to build it and taxes that I have to pay, right? It's not gonna show up on a.
No, but like an easier way to think of it, I go get a CT scan. The provider tax is on the CT scan itself.
No,
The radiologist
So
reading
can
that
I
is not charged.
Jen Carvey, Legislative Council. So the tax applies to the net patient revenue that comes into the hospital. So all the revenue less their expenses that the hospital gets is what the tax is on. The patient doesn't directly experience the provider tax.
Right, but it says right there that physician
Physician
services.
services
get
is a permissible level, is a permissible class of services. Vermont does not apply provider tax to physician services.
but if we did,
We apply them to hospital service, inpatient, outpatient hospital services, which is a sort of larger category that includes all of the physicians at the hospital.
Okay, so the primary care office at my local hospital, they're owned and affiliated with UVMC.
they get
Yep, their revenue is part of
They
the
all go
outpatient
into the
hospital service.
that
UVMC.
net patient revenue from any service provided in a hospital gets counted. So for instance, physician services, as Jen said, is not actually, we don't actually tax it. But physician services provided within the hospital are.
Yeah,
Okay,
so we capture hospital physician services basically by doing the hospital provider taxes. So I think in what you're asking about with the professional fees and the facility fees, I think both of those go into the revenue that is taxed for the hospitals.
Okay,
if
even
you're-
though a professional fee is
Practice.
physician services,
Um,
maybe not defined up.
not under that definition. So that would be like if we were to impose a tax directly on each licensed physician in the state. We don't do that. We go to the ones who are at the hospital and we tax the hospital. We don't go.
If
to
you're an
the physician
independent
level.
physician,
If you're an independent physician practicing in the community, you do not pay provider tax.
If you're a private practice.
Yeah.
If you're a private practice,
Independent.
yeah.
Yeah,
Not-
we wouldn't
not
pass the
really.
line.
What if you're an independent physician that works in the hospital?
If you're an independent physician, any service you provide in the hospital would be part of the provider tax. It goes to the hospital's revenue, not your individual revenue. Versus in your private practice, the revenue to your private practice without.
where the revenue goes.
Yeah,
When you take outpatient prescription drugs, if you were provided a prescription drug by the hospital's prescription drug facility, each one has it,
if the hospital's making money on it,
Yeah,
they're paying. the
you get
tax.
it, but that same
That's an
prescription
easier way.
drug
think of it. There you go. There you go. There we go. There we go.
Yeah, but I think the question is, if you fill your prescription from your doctor downstairs at the pharmacy before you leave the hospital grounds.
Yes.
Does that go under outpatient hospital services or outpatient prescription drugs? I think it's under the outpatient prescription drugs. It would be an inpatient prescription drug that would go on, if you were in inpatient status and you were
Right, this is
administered.
outpatient.
That
The
would be-
outpatient-
The outpatient prescription drugs are sold at a pharmacy, and I
Right.
think if that's, whether that's a hospital-owned pharmacy or a private pharmacy, the money would still be coming from the hospital, but the rate may be at the outpatient prescription drug rate as opposed to the net patient revenue rate.
Yeah,
So
that-
essentially, you're getting the same prescription. But you are getting it at a pharmacy outside the hospital, you're not paying it. If it's a pharmacy inside the hospital, you are.
No,
they're-
outpatient prescription drugs is any prescription drug that is not given to a patient who is in inpatient status.
Yeah, but the prescription is that by outpatient prescription drug, you don't mean every drug that goes to a pharmacy
I think we do.
anywhere.
Yeah.
So if you go to your local Walgreens or whatever, and
Yeah.
you get a prescription, that's treated as a provider
Correct.
tax.
It's, and actually, it's a good segue into the next slide.
10 cents per
10 cents per script.
prescription.
So the pharmacies pay it.
Yes.
So these are the current rates. These are who we tax, and these are the current rates and the current revenue. So you can see the biggest by far is hospital provider taxes. We tax them at 6% of net patient revenue. The 25 actuals that we got was 212 million. This all went to the general fund. We're forecasted to raise 225.1 million. Nursing homes. Now this one's a little weird because when this went into effect, when their nursing homes were negotiating with the state, they were like, hey, at least I was told, it's a lot easier for us to calculate if you just do it on a per bed basis. It still doesn't come to 6% of net patient revenue. That's why we can do it, because we know it doesn't do that, but it's easier for them to pay it this way. And that one hasn't actually increased in a long time. And the revenue's been pretty flat on that. It's been about 14.4 million per year, give or take, 10, 20,000.
Is that an annual number?
It's an annual number.
4919.
Oh, yes, that's per bed.
Not every time it switches.
Right. It's based on the size of the facility,
Yeah.
how many beds they have in the facility.
Yeah. Then we have an ambulance provider tax. This is the newest of them. I think this one's been in effect probably 6 or 7 years. It's 3.3%. It brings in about 1.4 million. Then we have the intermediate care facilities. It's at 5.9. We don't have any. And then finally, as we talked about, we have the pharmacies. And then we had home health at sunset in 2023. So then we raised 229 million in total provider taxes. Most of it was from hospitals in 25, and then we expect 242 million in fiscal year 26. But you can see hospitals accounted for roughly 93%. Just to give you a sense of context, provider tax has long been associated with Medicaid funding. In 2004, this is according to Kaiser. In 2004, 35 states had at least one provider tax, but 20 years later, 49 states and DC had at least one healthcare provider tax. Ironically, the most common was nursing homes. 46 states had nursing home provider tax, 45 had hospital provider tax. And then you have approximately 13 states, including Vermont, had provider taxes above 5.5% for hospitals, and approximately 20 states had provider taxes that were below 3.5. So you can see there are different states are doing it in different ways. They're taxing different classes. Some have
They
dentists.
have more nursing homes than Vermont,
Yeah.
more hospitals.
Just for my general knowledge, what's an intermediate care facility?
The full name was Intermediate Care Facility for Individuals with Developmental Disabilities. It was a particular type of,
It's like a group home.
Oh, okay.
group home,
Yeah.
that we no longer license in the category.
Now the slide that will bring you right. So HR 1 included a phase down of the provider tax rate that expansion states could charge from 6.6% to 3.5% by 2032. I have to check. Did I include the chart on this one?
I think we did it after this.
Next page.
Oh, it's on that. So in Vermont, it only impacts the hospital provider tax. And that's because the law specifically excludes nursing homes. And that our ambulance one is below 3.3. It's below 3.5. So really, in short, the one that we only one it affects is the hospital provider tax. That's 93% of the provider tax money we spend. So it will begin on 10/1/27, which is fiscal year 28. And then the law also prohibits this from enacting any new provider taxes. So we can't decide, hey, let's do physicians, let's do dentists. We cannot.
And switch something else in.
We can't switch something else, nor can we say we're going to go from 3.3 to 3.5. Like we're 3.7 or 4% for ambulances, but we can't do anything.
This is it, it's frozen.
This is frozen. So this is the estimated impact. And these numbers will continue to change. If you have AHS in here, the numbers are slightly different, but we're all sort of on the same page of our thinking. And so the preliminary estimate is that in fiscal year 28, when it starts stepping down, the first year will be 15 million, then it'll be 35 million, then it's 57 million. And by the end, when it's fully implemented, the last change is in fiscal year 32, but since federal fiscal year and state fiscal year, it will actually fully be implemented by fiscal year 33. On today's dollars, it's about $113 million revenue loss. So again, if you look before when I talked about provider tech FMAP, so when you have $113 million less in general fund, if you were to just say, okay, well, that's all general fund that's going to be spent on Medicaid, that's upwards of $300 million lost in service. Now, of course, how you address it is up to you guys. You have multiple levers. You can increase revenues, you can cut services, you can find efficiency, you can take it from elsewhere. Those are all the levers that you will have to look into. But the reality of this situation is that you have $113 million less of general fund coming to the state, whether it's Medicaid matched or not.
Sure, it's really your job to answer this, Nolan. What problem were they trying to solve here?
We have this discussion this morning.
What I will say is that I can't tell you, I'll tell you exactly what it is. And I'll also tell you that I remember the Obama administration was looking at this too.
Okay.
The way, I won't tell you what their motivations are, but I will tell you that when this bill happened, the bill booked lots of savings to the federal government. A big chunk of that is from this, the assumption that states will cut back on the Medicaid program, and when they cut back on their Medicaid programs, they're going to draw less federal match.
Okay. I mean,
Because it will mostly impact
yeah.
the states that have done Medicaid expansion and that have a
And what-
less Medicaid program.
And what they can say here is, we're not cutting Medicaid. We're just cutting your money. You're the ones who cut Medicaid.
Yeah.
Won't hate us. How much, if they already hate us, emerging school districts, how much more can they hate us?
Who are they?
Everybody.
They-
I mean, it's
Everybody.
the Obama administration.
How much?
They
hate
looked
do
at
they take?
Yeah.
No, when they were looking, I remember reading in the New York Times or something about how they were looking at savings. And they eventually didn't do it because states said, don't. And they said, oh, we get it.
So
Okay.
is the thinking theoretically that now you can then lower rates? Because you don't have to spend that provider tax, like out of your net patient revenue? So your reimbursement doesn't have to be.
This is a great question. Some people on the surface say, great, hospitals are saving $113 million. But if we have to cut Medicaid rates, they're gonna lose it in other ways. We start cutting our Medicaid rates in
Yeah.
hospitals, they don't save $113 million.
They're not.
Especially if let's say we're matching all that, that's now $200 to $300 million less in spending. They may actually come out behind.
Yeah, look,
It's for uncompensated care. People
Right.
don't want to-
Yeah,
it's
when
never
we're
how you
cutting
service
services,
for dollar.
yeah, actually to Jen's point, like if we cut services, if we cut access, we cut Medicaid, people are not going to see their services, and you're going to see an increase in uncompensated care. Hospitals have to eat that.
Yeah.
So there are other avenues which they'll save that on that end, and they're going to have on the other end. So
Our small rural hospitals that in poor areas, the bulk of their payments come from Medicaid. this is definitely going to impact their survivability. I mean, most of them right now are pink or red. I think most countries are the blue at the moment, but
What I would say is hospitals, not to put money towards in their mouth, they never like they don't like the provider tax,
oh, no,
but they understand.
yeah.
Yeah.
They
rather
not
than-
come in and, well, home health did, but they were really suffering because they had exclusive rights. And that was fought in court to provide home health services, and we let the for-profits in. And they let off people that were paying full freight with private insurance, went to all those things that are advertised on TV. And the home health got left with predominantly Medicaid payments, and were, I think they still are, but they were struggling even more as that change happened. Okay, thank you, Nolan. It's been uplifting.
Certainly it's well in front of you.
Yeah, thanks, Nolan. Appreciate it.
I get into with a joke.
Okay, here we go. I'm gonna get this
I got a lot of stuff.
really fast. Brattleboro, these are the 1, 2, 3. Ruth, you're near Brattleboro. You're closer than Randy.
Southern first in the.
Right. Shelburne,
Who's that?
Mike Donahue.
I don't like it.
This is the one Economic Progress Council.
I don't like it.
I'm happy to take.
Bye, guys. Have a nice
Okay.
weekend.
Bye.
Nope.
And Sarah Furman from Rutland. Okay, right here, Rutland.
Nobody-
Southern, you're the southern person in
The
this.
chair only does provision,
That was great.
or anybody else that no one take. Okay,